I have stood on the north wall of Cauldress Palace for 19 winters, and I will tell you something they never put in the manuals. The worst mornings don't announce themselves. They come in quiet. They come wearing ordinary light. That day started ordinary. I want you to understand that first. It was the tail end of autumn, the kind of morning where the fog sits low on the courtyard stones and doesn't lift until the bells ring 9. Cold, but not biting yet. The sort of cold that gets into the buckles of your uniform and makes the leather stiff. I remember rubbing my thumb over the strap of my rifle just to warm the motion in my hand. Small thing. You do small things to stay awake on a long post. The courtyard below me was already filling with people. Cauldress opens its outer yard to visitors 3 mornings a week, always has since the old king's time, and they come from everywhere. Families, old couples, children pressed up against the iron rail, pointing at the guards, waiting to see if one of us will blink. We're not supposed to. That's half the show, if I'm honest. People travel a long way to watch a man stand still. I counted maybe 200 of them by the time the fog started thinning. A man selling roasted nuts near the east gate. A little girl in a red coat who kept waving at the guard nearest the arch, trying to make him laugh. He didn't. Good lad. But I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, and I made a note to tease him about it later. That's the thing about that morning. I was thinking about ordinary things, teasing a young guard, whether the fog would burn off before noon, whether my knee would hold through the second shift. I was not thinking about the boy. Prince Emmett was 7 years old. I want to tell you what kind of 7 he was, because it matters for what comes later. Some royal children grow up stiff. You can see it in them young, the way they learn to keep their faces closed, the way they stop running because someone told them princes don't run. Emmett wasn't like that. Not yet. He still ran. He still asked questions that made the tutors go pale. He had this way of appearing where he wasn't supposed to be. The stables, the kitchens, once the top of the South Tower, which took 3 men an hour to talk him down from, and he wasn't scared at all. He just wanted to see how far he could see. I liked him, I'll say that plainly. Most of us on the watch did. He knew our names, which royal children mostly don't bother to learn. He knew mine. He called me Sergeant Ober, always both, like it was one word. Sergeant Ober. He'd shout it across the yard sometimes, and his nurse would go red and shush him, and he wouldn't stop. So when I say the morning was ordinary, understand, a part of me was probably half listening for him. You do that with the ones you care about. Some low part of your attention stays tuned to them even when you don't know it's doing it. Which is maybe why I heard the crying before anyone else did. It came from the West Colonnade. That's the long covered walk that runs from the family wing down toward the chapel, all stone pillars and shadow, and it carries sound strangely. A whisper down there can reach the far end clear as a bell, and a shout can vanish into the ceiling. I've never understood the architecture of it. I just know I heard a child crying, thin and high, and something in my chest went tight before my brain even caught up. I want to be honest about the fear. It wasn't noble. It wasn't the trained response they drill into you. It was just a plain animal drop in the stomach, the kind any of you would feel, the kind you'd feel hearing a child cry in a house you thought was empty. I started counting my heartbeats. That's a habit I picked up my first year on the wall, standing night watch alone, terrified of every shadow and too proud to say so. I learned to count my own heart to keep steady. 1, 2, 3. It slows you down. It keeps your hands from doing anything stupid. 19 winters later, I still do it when things tighten. I was at 4 before I'd even turned toward the sound. I came down off the wall faster than my knee wanted. Down the inner stair, into the shade of the colonnade, and there he was. Prince Emmett, sitting on the cold stone floor at the base of the 3rd pillar, knees pulled up, face wet and red and crumpled the way only a small child's face crumples. No dignity in it, no holding back, just pure open grief. His little jacket was undone. There was dust on his knees, and he was crying like the world had ended. I've seen a lot of things in 19 winters. That picture still finds me sometimes. Emmett, I said, I didn't shout it. You don't shout at a child in that state. I got down, my knee protesting the whole way until I was low as him, eye to eye. Emmett, it's Sergeant Ober, look at me. What happened? He couldn't get the words out at first, just gulping breaths. I've held enough frightened people to know you don't rush it. You wait. You keep your voice flat and warm and you wait. Around us, I was already aware of movement. Two more of the watch had heard and come in young Tam from the arch and Rel, who's built like a door and about as gentle as one until you know him. They hung back at the mouth of the colonnade, waiting on my signal. That's discipline. When a child of the house is crying and you don't know why, you don't come charging. You hold the perimeter and you let one voice do the talking. My heartbeats counted, 11, 12. Take a breath, I told him. Big one, there you go, now what happened? And that's when he said it. He looked up at me with those wet eyes and his lips shaking and he pointed, not far, just down the colonnade toward the dark end where it bends toward the chapel. And he said the words that turned that ordinary morning into the longest hour of my life. He did this to me. 4 words. I want you to sit with how those words land on a man like me. On a watch sergeant, kneeling in front of a crying 7-year-old prince, in a palace, with 2 armed men at his back and the child pointing into the dark. He did this to me. Everything in me went cold and flat and very, very fast. I have been trained for one thing above all others, not marching, not standing still for tourists. The one thing under all of it is this: something has happened to a child of the house, and the child is telling you a person did it. I did not think. There was no thinking. There was only the drop of the temperature in my own blood and the way my hand found the whistle at my collar without me deciding to reach for it. I looked down the colonnade, the dark end, the bend toward the chapel where the light doesn't reach until midday. And I saw the shape of a man standing there. Just standing, not running, not hiding. A tall shape in the shadow, motionless, and I could not see his face. I'll tell you the truth of what went through me in that second, because I promised you the truth. It wasn't a plan. It was rage. Clean, bright, total. There was a man in the shadows and a broken child at my knee, and the child had pointed and said he did this, and every good instinct and every terrible one lined up together and pointed the same way. I put the whistle to my lips. Rel had already seen the shape. He'd gone very still in the way big men go still right before they stop being still at all. Tam's hand was on his baton. Down in the courtyard, some part of the crowd had noticed something was wrong. You always know. Crowds always know before they understand. And a hush was spreading out there across 200 people like a shadow crossing grass. One blast of that whistle and the whole palace would move. Gates would seal. The man in the shadow would have 30 seconds before there were 12 of us on him, and I will be honest with you, I do not know in that moment whether I wanted him taken or whether I wanted worse. I was not a calm man. I want you to understand that. Everyone thinks the guard is always calm. We are not always calm. We are trained to act calm, which is not the same thing. And in that second the training was the only thing standing between that shadowed man and something I could not have taken back. I filled my lungs. And Emmett grabbed my sleeve. He grabbed my sleeve with both his small hands, hard, harder than a 7-year-old should be able to, and through the crying he said something else. Something I almost missed. Something that stopped the whistle in my mouth and stopped my heart somewhere north of where it should have been. He said, "No, no, don't, I did it. I did it, Sergeant Ober." He didn't. And then he cried too hard to finish. I froze with the whistle against my lips and the breath still in my chest, and the shape of the man still standing in the dark. I did it. 4 words pointing one way, 4 words pointing the exact opposite, and a child crying too hard to explain either. I lowered the whistle, slowly. My hand was not quite steady. I heartbeat counted and I could not find the number. I'd lost it. My own heart had gotten away from me for the first time in 19 winters. "Emmett," I said, and I heard my own voice come out rough. "Emmett, look at me. I need you to tell me very carefully, what did he do?" The man in the shadow still hadn't moved. And I realized, with a slow, cold horror crawling up the back of my neck, that I knew the way he was standing. I knew that stillness. I'd trained it into 100 men myself. That wasn't a stranger down there. That was one of mine. That was one of mine. I want to explain what that does to a man, because unless you've worn the coat you can't know. When you spend 19 winters on a wall, the men who stand it with you stop being other people. They become a part of your own body you happen to be able to see. You know the way each of them holds his shoulders. You know their coughs. You know who slept badly by the way he settles his weight in the first hour. And that stillness in the dark, that trained, patient, don't-move stillness, I had put that into 100 men with my own voice, on cold mornings just like this one. So when I recognized it, two things happened at once, and they fought each other the whole way down. The first was relief, sharp and immediate, not a stranger, not an intruder who'd slipped the walls to hurt a child, one of us. The second was worse than the fear had been, because if it was one of us, if a child of the house was crying on the stones and pointing at one of my own men, then something had gone wrong inside the family I'd sworn my life to. And that is a wound that doesn't close clean. "Stand where you are," I called down the colonnade. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Training does that for you when nothing else will. "Come forward, slow, into the light." The shape moved. He came out of the shadow the way I'd known he would, slow, hands loose and open and away from his sides, showing me he held nothing. And when the pale morning light finally caught his face, I felt the floor shift under me a second time. It was Havor. Now I have to stop and tell you about Havor, or none of the rest of it will mean anything. Havor was the oldest man on the watch, older than me by a decade, and I am not young. He should have been retired years back. The king's own physician had told him so twice, but Havor had no wife, no children, no land, nothing waiting for him past the palace walls. The watch was his whole life. So the king, who is a kinder man than the songs give him credit for, let him stay on light duties, inner posts, quiet corridors. The chapel walk mostly, where nothing ever happened and an old man's bad hip wouldn't matter. Havor had been on this wall longer than anyone alive, and in all those years I had never once known him to put a foot wrong. He was the man we held the young ones up to. Stand like Havor, wait like Havor. When I taught that patient stillness, his was the name I used. And here he was, walking out of the dark with his open hands raised, while a prince cried at my knee. "Sergeant," he said, just that. He didn't defend himself. He didn't rush to explain. He looked at me and then he looked down at Emmett, and I have never in my life seen an old man's face do what his did in that moment. It just folded. All that discipline, all that stillness, and underneath it something breaking very quietly. "Havor," I said, "what happened here?" And before he could answer, Emmett was up. The boy scrambled off the floor and got between us, put his small body right between me and Havor, arms out, the way you'd shield someone you loved, and he was still crying, but now he was shouting through it. "It wasn't him. Leave him alone. I told you I did it. It was me. He was just. "Emmett," Havor's voice low and rough and impossibly gentle. "Emmett, lad, enough now. It's all right." "It's not all right," the boy screamed, and the whole courtyard beyond the arch must have heard it. "You said you'd say it was you, and I let you, and I can't let you." And then the whole thing came apart, and the truth came out of a sobbing 7-year-old in pieces, and I had to kneel there and put it together while my heart was still trying to find its rhythm. Here is what had happened. I'll tell it to you straight, the way I finally understood it, standing in that cold colonnade with two of my men at the mouth of it, and an old soldier and a small prince both crying in front of me. Emmett's mother, the queen, had died 2 winters before. I won't dress that up. It was a hard death and a hard year, and the whole palace had walked soft through it. The king had grieved like a man made of stone, which is to say badly in silence, in ways that scared the household more than weeping would have. And the boy had been 5, and then 6, and nobody had ever really known how much he understood or how much he carried. Because he ran and he laughed and he climbed towers, and everyone was so relieved to see him happy that no one looked too hard underneath. The Queen had kept a small thing in the chapel, a music box, old plain, nothing valuable to a jeweler, worth nothing and everything the way those things are. She'd played it for Emmett when he was a baby. After she died, the king had it moved to a shelf in the chapel alcove, and once in a while, they told me later, he'd go and stand near it. Never wound it, just stood near it. That was the king's grieving, standing near a thing his wife had touched. Emmett had wanted to hear it. That's all. That's the whole crime at the bottom of that terrible morning. A 7-year-old boy missed his mother and wanted to hear the music she used to play him, and he'd slipped away from his nurse and gone to the chapel alcove and climbed up to reach it. Climbed, the way he always did. The way I'd seen him climb the south tower, and it had come off the shelf, and it had fallen, and it had broken on the chapel stones. Havre had heard it fall. His post was the chapel walk. He'd come and found the boy standing over the pieces of his dead mother's music box, white as the fog outside, understanding all at once exactly what he'd done and exactly whose grief he'd just shattered on the floor. And Havre, old Havre, who had no children of his own and had watched this boy grow up from a wall, had knelt down in front of that terrified child and told him, "I'll say it was me. I knocked it down cleaning the alcove. You go on, lad. You were never here." He was going to take it, a broken keepsake of the king's dead wife, and Havre was going to walk into that grieving man's presence and say, "I did this, Majesty, my hands, my fault," and take whatever came. Dismissal, likely, after a lifetime on the wall, at his age with nothing outside the gates. He'd have lost the only life he had to spare a child 1 hour of a father's grief. And Emmett had let him start to. Had run from the alcove with the plan in place, and gotten as far as the 3rd pillar of the colonnade before his own heart caught up with him, and the guilt of it broke him, and he'd sat down on the cold stone and cried. And when I came running and asked what happened, the boy hadn't been pointing at Havre in accusation at all. "He did this to me." He meant, he did this kindness to me, this terrible, unbearable kindness, and I can't carry it. A 7-year-old doesn't have the words. He had 4. He'd pointed at the man who loved him enough to fall on a sword for him, and he'd said the only thing his breaking heart could push out, and I, trained for one thing above all others, had heard a threat and reached for my whistle. I'd nearly called the whole watch down on the gentlest man I knew. I sat back on my heels. My knee had gone past hurting into numb. Tam and Rel were still at the mouth of the colonnade, and I lifted one hand to them, palm flat, "Stand down, it's over, it was never what we thought." Rel let out a breath I could hear from 30 feet. Down in the courtyard the hush was breaking up into ordinary noise again, the crowd deciding, the way crowds do, that whatever had frightened them was nothing after all. They were wrong about that. It wasn't nothing. It was one of the biggest things I ever saw. But it wasn't the thing they'd feared, and that was enough for them, and they went back to watching men stand still. "Havre," I said, my voice wasn't working right, "you daft old man." He looked at me over the boy's head. And he didn't say anything because there was nothing to say, because we both knew exactly what he'd been about to do, and exactly what it would have cost him, and exactly why he'd have paid it without a second's hesitation. Emmett was still between us, still crying but quieter now, the storm of it passing into the long, shaky aftermath. He turned around and looked up at Havre, and then at me, and in the smallest, most wrecked voice I have ever heard a child use, he asked the question that I still hear on cold mornings. "Is father going to hate me? Is father going to hate me?" I have thought about that question more than a man my age should admit to thinking about anything. 19 winters on the wall, and the thing that stays with me isn't a battle or a siege or any of the dark nights they warn you about when you're young. It's a 7-year-old boy on cold stone asking if his father was going to stop loving him. I didn't answer him right away. I want to be honest, I didn't answer because I didn't know, that's the truth of it. I'd served the king a long time and I loved the man, but grief does things to people and the king's grief had teeth. I'd seen him go silent in ways that frightened grown soldiers. And now his son had broken the last thing his dead wife's hands had touched. I couldn't stand there and promise the boy something I wasn't sure of. You don't lie to a child in that state. They remember it forever. So I said the only true thing I had. No, I told him. Your father is not going to hate you, but we have to go and tell him, both parts, the breaking and the— I looked at Havar. And the rest of it, all of it. You understand me, Emmett? No hiding. Not even the kind that's meant to be kind. The boy's face crumpled again, but he nodded, small, brave, braver than most men I've stood beside. Now here is where I have to tell you what I did, because I've never been fully sure it was my place to do it, and I've never once regretted it. I did not send for the king through the household. The proper way, the way the manual would have me do it, was to report up the chain, let the chamberlain prepare his majesty, let it become a matter. Something written down. Something with witnesses and a ruling and a consequence for Havar, because a guard confessing to damaging royal property, even falsely, even nobly, is still a thing the palace has to answer for. I didn't do it the proper way. I gathered up the pieces of that music box myself, off the chapel stones, every splinter I could find, into my own 2 hands. And I took the boy by one hand and I told Havar to walk with us, and the 4 of us, me, the prince, the old guard, and a broken box in my palms, we went to find the king ourselves. No chamberlain, no report, just us. I found him where I'd guessed he would be. Not on the throne, not in the council room. He was in the small east study that had been the queen's, standing at the window the way grieving men stand at windows, looking at nothing. He turned when we came in, and I watched his face move through the whole sequence, surprise at seeing his son's tear-streaked face, then alarm, then the hard, flat mask a king puts on when he thinks he's about to be told something terrible. "What's happened?" he said. Not a question, a brace. And before I could manage a word, Emmett let go of my hand and walked across that room to his father, and he held up his own small hands, empty. And he said, in a voice that shook all the way through but did not stop, "I broke Mother's music box. I climbed up to hear it and it fell and I broke it and it's my fault, and Havar tried to say it was him so you wouldn't be sad at me, but I can't let him because he didn't do anything. He was just being kind. And I'm sorry, Father, I'm so sorry." And then the boy ran out of words and just stood there, 7 years old, waiting to find out if he was still loved. I have seen the king in armor. I have seen him rule. I have seen him bury his wife with his jaw set like stone and not shed a tear where anyone could see. I had never seen him do what he did then. He went down on his knees. A king, on the floor of his dead wife's study, down to the boy's level the way I'd gone down in the colonnade. And he took his son's empty hands in his own, and I saw the stone come off his face all at once, and underneath it was just a father. Just a tired, sad, frightened father who had almost forgotten he still had someone to lose. "You climbed up," the king said very quietly, "to hear your mother's music." Emmett nodded, too scared to speak. "Because you missed her." Another nod, and then the boy whispered, "Don't you?" And the king broke, right there. The grief he'd been carrying like stone for 2 winters came up out of him, and he pulled his son against his chest and held on. And I want to tell you that I, a watch sergeant of 19 years, stood at the door of that room with a handful of broken music box and cried like I hadn't since I was a boy myself. Rel would never have let me hear the end of it. I didn't care. Some things you don't stand still for. When the king could speak again, he held Emmett out at arm's length and looked at him, and he said the words I'd hoped for and hadn't been able to promise. "A box is a box, Emmett, wood and springs. Your mother is not in a box. Your mother is in you, she is in your climbing and your questions and the fact that you could not let an old man take your blame for you." His voice cracked on that. "That last thing, that is exactly who she was. She would have done the same. I could never hate the part of you that is most like her." Then the king stood, and he turned to Havar, and the whole air in the room changed. Havar came to attention. Full attention, the best I'd ever seen him hold it, spine straight despite the hip, chin level, eyes forward. A man ready to accept whatever fell on him. He'd broken a rule. He tried to deceive his king, even in kindness, and he knew it, and he stood there ready to lose the only life he had and did not flinch. The king looked at him a long moment. "You were going to tell me you did it," the king said. "Yes, Majesty. You were going to let me believe you damaged the Queen's music box. You'd have taken my anger, my dismissal, likely." "Yes, Majesty, not a tremor in it. At your age, with nothing past these walls." "Yes, Majesty." The king was quiet again. Then he said, "Why?" An old Havar, who I had held up to 100 young men as the model of a guard who never showed a thing, said something I will carry to my own grave. "Because I've stood a wall my whole life, Majesty, and I never had a son of my own to stand it for. That boy learned my name when he was 3. He waves at me from the yard. I've got nothing to leave behind me when I go but the years I gave this house, and I'd rather leave them spent on sparing that child one bad hour than keep them for myself." He swallowed. "It wasn't my place, I know it, but I'd do it again. I'm too old to lie to you about that, Majesty. I'd do it again tomorrow." The room was very quiet. The king crossed to him, and he did not dismiss Havar. He reached out and gripped the old man's shoulder the way you grip a brother, not a servant, and he said, "Then you'll stand it a while longer, not the chapel walk, here, near my son, where a man like you belongs." He paused. "The Queen would have wanted her boy guarded by someone who loved him. I can think of no one who's proven it better." Havar's discipline held right up until then. That last word undid him. I watched the oldest, stillest man on the watch put a hand over his own face and turn away so the king wouldn't see, and the king, being a better man than the songs allow, pretended not to. That's most of the story. There's only a little more, and then I'll let you go. We fixed the music box, or rather a clockmaker in the lower town fixed it, over 3 careful weeks, and it never sounded quite the same after, a little slower, a note or two off. Emmett said he liked it better broken and mended, said it sounded like it had been through something, out of the mouth of a 7-year-old. I've heard worse wisdom from grown philosophers. Havar took his new post at the boy's side and held it 4 more years, until his hip finally won and the king retired him with honors and a cottage inside the walls, where Emmett visited him near every day until the old man passed, quiet in his sleep, an old soldier who died with people who loved him. That's not nothing. Most of us on the wall don't get that. Havar got it because a music box fell off a shelf, and he chose, in the half-second that follows a thing like that, to be kind at his own expense. And me, I went back to my wall. I still count my heartbeats when things tighten. I still tease the young ones when they nearly smile at the tourists. And on cold autumn mornings, when the fog sits low and won't lift till the bells ring 9, I think about how close I came to blowing that whistle. How close I came to reading 4 words wrong and bringing the whole watch down on the gentlest man I ever served beside. He did this to me. I heard a threat. I heard the worst thing a guard can hear, and it turned out to be the opposite, a child too small to hold the weight of someone else's kindness, pointing at the man who loved him. I've learned to be slower since, to wait, to let the child finish before I reach for the whistle. Because the truth almost never lives in the first 4 words. It lives in the 5th.